Republican leader.
I want to begin today with a quotation. Quote, "Because this massive accumulation of debt was predicted, because it was foreseeable, because it was unnecessary, because it was the result of willful and reckless disregard for the warnings that were given and for the fundamentals of economic management, I'm voting against the debt limit increase." Now, Madam President, that was then Senator Joe Biden in March of 2006, right before every single Democratic senator voted against raising the debt limit and made a unified Republican government do it alone. Here's another quote. "Today's fiscal mess is the inevitable outcome of policies that consistently ignored evidence and experience. My symbolic vote against raising the debt limit would have been a protest of the policies that have brought us to this point and a demand that we change course," end quote. Well, that same speaker, then Senator Biden, 2 years earlier, in 2004, as Senate Republicans have made clear since last July, and as I reminded the President in a letter just this morning, his sentiments then are our sentiments now. His sentiments then are our sentiments now. For the last few weeks, Washington Democrats tried to forget that they lined up to oppose debt limit increases during unified Republican government. They pretended these votes are always bipartisan. Well, that was simply not true. So now our colleagues have moved on to yet another new argument that is equally flimsy. Now, they claim they'd be perfectly happy to handle this responsibility with 51 votes done one way, but they'd rather risk the nation's credit than doing it with 51 votes a slightly different way. Two different ways to achieve 51 votes. I'm not kidding. This is the position they're taking. The President said it today. The reconciliation procedure would be slightly more inconvenient, they said. A few more days, a few more votes they'd rather duck. The Democratic leaders running America are saying with a straight face that the entire U.S. economy should live or die based on the procedural convenience of Washington Democrats. Now, I've got no problem using the party line process over and over and over to spend trillions and transform the country. But now, for this purpose only, they suddenly and mysteriously find it unappealing. Democrats could not be more capable of handling this on their own. Just months ago, the Democratic leader won new powers to reuse reconciliation over and over. They don't even need our consent to set a vote at 51 instead of 60. They need even less help raising the debt limit than majorities needed in the past. So trust me, Madam President, if Republicans were sitting on a hidden veto power to stop reconciliation bills, you would have heard about it way back in the springtime. The majority doesn't need our votes. They just want a bipartisan shortcut around procedural hurdles they can actually clear on their own. And they want that shortcut so they can pivot right back to partisan spending as fast as possible. They want a bipartisan shortcut to get right back to more partisan hardball. And Republicans have spent 2.5 months, this is no surprise, 2.5 months ago, explaining that this is the way they needed to go forward on the debt ceiling. This unified Democratic government is having trouble governing. They couldn't even pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which the President negotiated and the Speaker of the House promised would pass last week. The majority needs to stop sleepwalking toward yet another preventable crisis. Democrats need to tackle the debt limit. We gave them a roadmap and 3 months' notice. I suggest that our colleagues get moving. Now, on an obviously related matter, speaking of Democrats' reckless taxing and spending, this unified government is behind closed doors, brainstorming ways to make inflation even more painful for American families. Their next reckless taxing and spending spree is packed with radical left-wing policies and the biggest tax hike on the American people in half a century. So far, the bill is more than 2,400 pages long, but it can be summarized in just 4 words: hurts families and helps China. Hurts families and helps China. Wasting trillions and trillions of dollars on socialism would be a bad idea any day, but it's a uniquely bad idea at a time when American families are already being hammered by inflation and soaring costs. The government's own data continue to indicate that the historic and painful inflation that began to take hold of our economy this spring isn't going anywhere anytime soon. The chairman of the Federal Reserve acknowledged last week that rising prices have become an increasingly broad and structural problem. Last week, the Commerce Department reported that inflation has continued to rise faster than at any time since 1991. The Democrats' inflation is so bad that even though the average American worker has gotten a multiple percentage point pay raise over the last year, their actual purchasing power has actually been cut. Their paychecks have gone up, but their buying power has gone down. Wholesale inflation just marked the steepest 12-month jump on record. Even dollar stores are having to raise their prices. Just ask any American family about the last few trips to the supermarket, the gas station, or the toy store. Heaven forbid if they've had to participate in the housing market or the auto market anytime lately. And the Democrats are uniting around yet another multi-trillion-dollar taxing and spending spree. I guess our colleagues think they can inflate their way out of inflation. That is going to be an extraordinarily painful experiment for the middle-class families of our country.